As you begin to explore the Leslie Palacio case, it is impossible not to feel bewildered and disappointed that justice has not yet been served. The killer remains at large, even though the police have all the evidence and his identity is known to them. Today's story underscores the difficulty of investigating crimes when suspects find themselves outside the jurisdiction, and victims can only hope that the perpetrators will be found and brought to justice. The morning of the 29th brought anxiety to the home of Rosalia Palacio, mother of 5 lovely daughters. Her eldest daughter, Kayla, came down to the kitchen and reported that the bed in Leslie's room was untouched. Her belongings were gone, and she clearly hadn't spent the night at home. One of the sisters joked that it must have been a pretty fun night at the club, and Leslie had probably stayed the night at Eric's. In fact, everyone became alarmed, since Leslie had never done this before. Over breakfast, Kayla kept glancing at her phone, expecting a waking Leslie to be about to text. Time passed, but still no word from Leslie. By noon, it stopped seeming normal. By late afternoon, Rosalia decided to go to Eric's house on her own and find out where her daughter had disappeared to. When the Palacio family members drove up to the house, they saw Eric's mother and his sister actively removing pieces of furniture and miscellaneous items from the house. Obviously, taking furniture out of the house is quite normal, but the situation itself and Mrs. Ibara's crying face caused a very strange feeling for Rosalia. Something was not right here. When asked where Leslie was and why Eric's phone was unavailable, Eric's mother and sister pretended that they didn't even know that the couple had spent the evening together. Rosalia once again clarified whether Leslie had slept over at their house that night, because she knew from her daughter's messages that she was going to Eric's house. After receiving a negative response, Leslie's family realized the seriousness of what was happening. Fears became reality, and the family immediately took action. The older sister, realizing that Leslie could not have disappeared so easily, began calling local hospitals and searching the internet for reports of accidents in the last 24 hours. However, the search was unsuccessful, as were attempts to contact Eric. He had either turned off his phone or the phone was dead, as Kayla couldn't even hear the voicemail. Rosalia had no choice but to call the police. The next day, August 30th, Leslie was officially reported missing. The move was the first in an intense fight for justice. Leslie Palacio was born on May 5, 1998, in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Her short but full life was full of love and caring for her family. Always open and friendly girl became a source of joy in any company, as she valued everyone she met in her life and was reciprocated. Leslie dreamed of connecting her life with medicine. After graduating from high school, she entered the Las Vegas Medical College. In 2020, she was already confidently moving towards her dream of becoming a phlebotomist and worked part-time as a lab technician, combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills. Leslie proved herself to be a talented student. Her academic achievements were admirable. She was able to easily assimilate new material and always strive to deepen her knowledge. That is why the girl decided to work part-time as a laboratory assistant. Unexpectedly, Leslie realized that she had found her calling and soon became an integral part of the team. Colleagues considered the student not only a responsible and professional lab technician, but also a warm, responsive person. The girl's duties included conducting various analyses and tests, but for Leslie, this work was much more than just a fulfillment of duties. She saw her calling in the ability to make the process of taking tests as comfortable as possible for patients. Her caring and patience created an atmosphere of trust, and even those who were apprehensive about the procedure felt at ease in her presence. When the youngest of the nurses asked if Leslie was afraid of getting her hands pierced all the time, she laughingly replied that she now had a super ability to poke people. The young optimist's vitality was evident in her every action. By all accounts, Leslie had the unique potential to become a sought-after and valuable specialist in the field of medical laboratory diagnostics, and she would have, if not for a dramatic turn of events. Leslie has been used to helping and caring for everyone since childhood. As the second of 5 daughters, she took on the role of mother when Rosalia Palacio worked as a hotel cleaner. Rosalia recalled her daughter kicking her out of the kitchen when she tried to cook dinner after cleaning more than 15 hotel rooms in a shift. "Get some rest," Leslie gently urged her. Wanting to relieve her mother's burden after work, her daughter took it upon herself to prepare dinners and, in her characteristic easygoing manner, found cooking to be a source of inspiration. From then on, she always made sure her family members were very well fed, and even if she was away and couldn't make the family dinner herself, she always called home to make sure everyone had eaten. For Leslie, family came first, and she easily inspired her sisters with her energy and ideas. For example, even during the pandemic, Leslie didn't let sports disappear by organizing workouts in the backyard of the house. She taught her mother various exercises, and with her sisters she danced daily in front of the mirror to music. Her love of experimenting with hair color and image turned it into a joint business plan with her older sister to open a boutique. The sisters began designing and sewing dresses at home in their own unique style. When the coronavirus pandemic happened and Rosalia was laid off due to downsizing, Leslie suggested her mother start her own small cleaning company and assured her that she would definitely help her with the cleanings in her free time from work and school. "Mom, we'll be fine soon, you'll see," she assured Rosalia. At a family council, they came up with a name for the company, the Palacio Cleaning Service. At the time Leslie disappeared, her dreams were just beginning to be realized. Their family firm had landed its first contract. But on August 29, 2020, all of the Palacio family's plans and dreams came crashing down. At the end of August 2020, Leslie completed the lab assistant program, and the family firm also received a large order. The girl decided it was time to take a break from the stresses and worries and enjoy an evening of dancing and fun. Especially the restrictions due to the pandemic were gradually being lifted, and Las Vegas began to come alive. Unfortunately, none of the friends wanted to keep Leslie company. Although people were beginning to let go of their fears and return to their normal lives, they still felt nervous and anxious at the prospect of being in a closed space with lots of people. Leslie didn't give up hope of convincing someone to have fun and posted a post on Instagram expressing her desire to spend the evening somewhere. Unexpectedly, she received a message from Eric Rangel Ibara. Leslie and Eric's parents had been attending the same church for 14 years and occasionally socialized. So the children had known each other since childhood, but had never interacted closely. Leslie knew what Eric liked. The guy texted her, showed her attention, but Leslie never reciprocated. She was polite to him, however. On any other day, Leslie would have declined Eric's desire to keep her company, but not this time. She was eager to dilute her ordinary life with a fun evening. The whole day passed in anticipation and anticipation. And when none of Leslie's friends wanted to keep her company, she accepted Eric's polite and warm offer to reminisce about Las Vegas nightlife. Sharing a night out with Eric seemed like a better choice than going nowhere at all. Expecting a fun adventure, Leslie had no idea what horrible events awaited her, but she probably had a premonition of something, trying to rationalize to herself that there was no cause for concern. Anyway, Leslie agreed with her sister that she would send her regular messages, telling her exactly where she was. She also told Kayla in great detail where she was going and with whom and what places she might end up in. After a while, the older sister received a strange message. "Can you believe Eric is totally not going to drink this evening? We're at a party, but it looks like I'm going to have to party alone." Afterward, the sisters exchanged joking messages on the topic of healthy living. The first place Eric and Leslie went to was the casino at the Longhorn Hotel. Police officers would later see on surveillance footage of the couple getting out of a white Ford F-250 owned by Eric, at 0:31 a.m. on Ayug 29 and entering the casino, then leaving a short time later at 1:56 a.m. The couple would then leave the casino. Leslie kept in contact with her sister, telling her what was going on. At 4:40 a.m., Leslie sent her sister another strange message. "I need to talk to you about something shitty." Kayla asked what happened and, according to her, a text box popped up, as if Leslie had started to reply, but no answer ever came. That text message was the last of the girl's life. The morning of the 29th came. Leslie still hadn't returned home. The more time passed, the more concerned the Palacio family members became. The certainty that Leslie had stayed the night at Eric's house was replaced by confusion, and the family went to a familiar house, where they found a strange scene. Mrs. Ibara and her daughter were taking out furniture, pretending that they had heard for the first time that Leslie and Eric had spent the evening together. In fact, Leslie's family arrived at Eric's house just in time. If they had arrived a few hours later, the investigation would have been significantly delayed. The police found traces of blood in the house, a mess in the bedroom, which suggests that Eric's mother and his sister spent the whole day, strangely enough, not to clean up the traces of the crime, but to pack things, down to the pieces of furniture. The family was clearly not going on a picnic, but planning a long-term and thorough absence. Most likely, they had arranged to reunite with Eric and his father, Jose, in Mexico, where the two had traveled in order to escape justice. Upon seeing the Palacio family, Mrs. Ibarra probably realized that the chance to leave was gone, leaving evidence in the house that no one would take the time to clean up. Panicked, mother and daughter began to simply deny knowing about Leslie and Eric's evening together. It was this behavior that led to the suspicion that something irreparable had happened. Fortunately, the Las Vegas police took immediate action and sent out a billing inquiry intending to track Leslie's movements since the previous night. But unfortunately, it takes some time to get that data, while the Palacios couldn't sit back and wait. The family started a campaign to spread the word about Leslie's disappearance. People responded and began actively sharing the information on social media. No one expected that there would be so many people who cared. Eric's mom especially didn't expect it. Detectives kept asking more and more questions, and on August 31st, Mrs. Ibarra went to the police station and filed a missing persons report for her husband and son. Mrs. Ibarra told police that her son, Eric, left home late in the evening on August 28th. And when he returned the next morning, he was acting strangely. She saw him walk out the door and never returned. The police noticed a strange circumstance. Not only was Leslie missing, but Eric was also missing, as well as his father. Based on this, an investigation into the triple disappearance began, with the Las Vegas police involved. Detectives turned to the residents of the neighborhood with the hope of finding surveillance cameras that recorded something important. Luck smiled. It was discovered that just across the street from Jose Ibarra's home, there were surveillance cameras. In addition to the CCTV footage, police obtained billing data that allowed them to track Leslie's movements in the early morning hours of the 29th. Detectives found that the couple went to the casino and afterward to a grill bar, which they reached around 02:15 a.m. Accidentally or not, Leslie's cell phone was left at the bar, and the records show that Leslie left the establishment around 5:50 a.m., which is quite early in the morning. At 06:05 a.m., neighborhood cameras captured Eric's car pulling up to the family home. The nature of his assistance to Leslie in getting out of the car and on the way to the house clearly indicated that the girl was heavily intoxicated. At 07:25 a.m., Eric and his father, Jose, are seen carrying Leslie's body out of the house, wrapped in a sheet, and placing it in the trunk of the car. Eric then drives away while Jose hoses down the driveway to their house. These actions clearly indicated that Eric and Jose were not missing, but were fugitives from justice. After police saw the footage, a search warrant was obtained for Ibara's home. As a result, detectives uncovered a lot of additional evidence showing that Leslie had not left the house voluntarily. The house had been cleaned with cleaning products in an unsuccessful attempt. Latex gloves and trash bags were also found. But the most important piece of evidence was the discovery in Eric's room. Traces of blood were found on the floor and on Eric's bed, an obvious sign of assault. And without DNA testing, it was clear to investigators that the blood belonged to Leslie. From that point on, Leslie Palacio was no longer missing, and investigators focused their efforts on finding her body. Eric and Jose were reported missing. As investigators searched diligently for suspects, the shaken Palacio family made efforts as well. Roselia asked members of the church community to help search for her daughter's body as search volunteers. Flyers and posters with Leslie's photo and images of Eric and Jose appeared on social media, newspapers, and street poles. The Palacio family is asking the public to intervene and help them find these two men involved in the girl's death, was the message on each flyer. The first major breakthrough in the investigation came when a license plate reader spotted Eric's car just 6 miles from his home around 10 a.m. August 29. He was heading back to his home just 4 hours after Leslie's alleged murder. The information uncovered made investigators realize that the location where Eric may have hidden the body was within a 4-hour drive of his home, on the Nevada-Arizona border, or the Charleston Peak side, which is a huge area. So detectives were desperate for any additional information that could help them determine a more precise location. Once again, luck smiled on them when footage was recorded at a gas station 40 miles north of Las Vegas, showing Eric's car pulling off the highway toward the Valley of Fire National Park. The car backed up 20 minutes later with muddy tires. The find narrowed the search and pointed to the possible location of the body within 20 miles of the gas station. The mud on the tires suggested that Eric had driven off the road at some point. Detectives began searching the area. Police and volunteers combed through hundreds of acres of land. And on September 9, during a second search, they found Leslie Palacio's body hidden near a bush. News outlets immediately spread the word. The body of 22-year-old Leslie Palacio has been found near the Valley of Fire, 11 days after she disappeared. A reporter joined the report, providing additional details about the prime suspect, 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibara. The Valley of Fire, where the body was found, is known for its hot climate, which led to rapid decomposition of the remains, and forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Locals reacted to Leslie's death with horror and fear. Some became afraid to go outside because of the constant thoughts of the unquote criminals involved in the murder. The day after the body was discovered, September 10th, many friends, relatives, neighbors, and just random people in the area gathered to honor Leslie's memory. People took candles that were used for the nightly vigil and placed them in front of the girl's house. They also said they wanted the man responsible for her death to pay for what he did. The fight for justice was not even close to being over at this point. The next major breakthrough came when Eric's car flashed in Moreno Valley, California. Police eventually contacted Eric's cousin, and he reported that he had driven Jose and his son to San Isidro, where he believed they planned to cross the border into Mexico. The Las Vegas Police Department requested assistance from the FBI because it was not possible for them to resolve the jurisdictional issue on their own. The investigation slowed down. Then, on January 19, 2021, 4 months after the discovery of the girl's remains, Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border. Everyone was greatly relieved that at least one fugitive was now in custody. The man was quickly extradited back to Clark County and charged with destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. During interrogations, Jose tried to minimize his involvement in the crime, explaining the story of the trip to Mexico by his son's strange behavior on the morning of August 29th. However, investigators showing surveillance video footage debunked his false claims. The footage clearly showed him helping carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Faced with the evidence, Jose changed his testimony. He said he was working in the garage when Eric brought Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet, into the garage. According to Jose, he panicked and helped his son load the body into the truck, assuming that Leslie had died of an overdose of illegal drugs because he saw no visible injuries on the body. Court documents indicate that Jose initially told police that, according to Eric, Leslie died of an overdose of illegal drugs. Jose also explained that Eric immediately talked about wanting to end his life, blamed himself, and so he decided that the best thing to do for his son was to take him to Mexico. When investigators asked Jose for Eric's current whereabouts, he explained that as soon as the two of them entered Mexico and boarded the bus was searched by Mexican authorities. He and his son got scared and decided to split up, thinking that apart it would be harder for the authorities to find them. For this reason, he would love to help the investigation, but has absolutely no idea where his son might be. On June 18, 2021, Jose formally pleaded guilty to destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. Despite the horrific characteristics of his crimes, Jose Ibara was sentenced to only 2 years in the Clark County Detention Center, causing shock and dismay in the community. The Palacio family was shocked and outraged by Jose's lenient sentence, which they felt was unjust. During the pandemonium, Jose Ibara joined the court proceedings virtually, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They urged the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was not enough for an accessory to murder who helped dispose of the body and hid the perpetrator. Jose Ibara pleaded guilty and tried to apologize to Palacio's family, saying his love for his son outweighed him. He expressed regret for his actions. However, Leslie's family did not accept his apology and did not consider it sincere. To date, Eric's whereabouts remain unknown, and he continues to live a free life in Mexico. Jose was released on April 28, 2022. Ofelia Marcarian, attorney and representative of the Palacio family, commented as follows: "I am absolutely furious. This is simply unfair. Not only is the main suspect not in custody, now the one who was involved in covering up the murder is back in custody after serving 8 months and 15 days. Over the past 3 years, the Palacio family has never gotten justice." Leslie's story highlights the flaws in the justice system and raises questions about fairness in dealing with serious crimes. The Palacio family is determined to fight to change the law in Nevada because they believe that whoever was involved in the murder should receive a longer prison sentence than 2 years. They hope that the perpetrator will be found and prosecuted in the United States, where he will be charged and given the punishment he deserves. Ofelia Marcarian is directly reaching out to those who may know of Eric's whereabouts in Mexico. In every media interview, she calls for Palacio's family to be given a small measure of justice. Lisa Maria Caiza was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Caiza, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lissa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lissa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lissa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lissa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lissa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lissa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lissa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lissa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lissa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lissa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lissa called several times inquiring about him. Lissa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime, where he mentioned that illegal substance traffickers were holding him captive and demanding a ransom of $8,000. She strongly warned Jaime's family not to contact the police. This claim became a crucial point in a complex investigation, as detectives sought to solve the tragedy and uncover if there were any other hidden victims. During her interrogation, Lissa revealed that in 2020, while working at a cookie factory, she met Jaime Yanchaguano. According to her, they became friends. Lissa wanted to return to her husband, who allegedly planned to blackmail Jaime for money. David made it clear to Lissa that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David gave Lissa a white powder and told her to put it in Jaime's food. Once she did, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up. Realizing what had happened, Lissa, in desperation, tried to win back her husband, but failed. In her despair, she ingested the same poison and gave it to her children. However, the poison did not have the expected effect on her, and she sought help from her neighbors to save herself from the horror that had befallen her children. Following her testimony, investigators launched a thorough investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement was found. No one close to the couple could have foreseen that Lisa Maria and David Acosta's lives would take such a tragic turn. When they met, Lisa was only 16 years old and still in high school, a dreamy and romantic girl, while David was a strong and determined young man. Their friendship quickly developed into strong feelings, leading to Lisa's unexpected pregnancy. Although their families disapproved of their relationship, David's parents supported their son and welcomed Lisa into their home. In difficult times, David's family provided genuine support to the young couple, even inviting Lisa to live with them to ensure she completed high school. When Lisa turned 18, the couple got married. 2 years later, they were expecting their second child, a daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own home, giving them an apartment where they found a corner of family happiness. However, over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Both spouses were unfaithful, leading to mistrust and disappointment. Their once boundless love began to weaken. Lisa also complained of psychological abuse from David, prompting her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, forcing David to leave the family home. At this point, Lisa began to blackmail David, demanding money for the chance to see their children. In early September 2020, Lisa's life took an unexpected turn when her eldest son began suffering from seizures. In desperation, she took him to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing his condition, doctors conducted tests and diagnosed a focal form of epilepsy, a severe condition affecting a specific part of the brain. Doctors advised Lisa to undergo further tests, including MRIs, and to consult specialists urgently. However, Lisa ignored these recommendations. A month later, her son suffered another seizure, and they returned to the emergency room. Reviewing his medical history, doctors discovered Lisa had not followed their earlier advice, failed to complete tests, and had not seen specialists, leaving her son without necessary treatment. They warned her that continued neglect could lead to legal consequences. Despite the warnings, Lisa disregarded the medical advice. A few weeks later, after her son's condition resurfaced, she called David, who was alarmed by her serious tone. She informed him that a social worker would visit to discuss. To brighten the waiting time, Lisa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up. So David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lisa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lisa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lisa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache. Her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lisa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Berta lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lisa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lisa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Berta to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed. But now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke. Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious, and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him, and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death, and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lissa Maria Kaiser for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her, because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, The daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jamie Ianchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen. The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others, and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaiser was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Ianchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jaime's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lissa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lissa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lissa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lissa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lissa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lissa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there is evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lissa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lissa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lisa Maria Kaisi is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lisa could be released when she turns 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lisa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anker Hilton was found beaten and stabbed to death. She was discovered in a bedroom at her employer's house, a house she moved into only the previous day, seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. Jane was discovered by 2 fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The murder made no sense, and the case dragged for 14 years, until 2 new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquote in an article led investigators to point the finger at Ricky Davis. Davis was eventually tried for the crime and convicted, all the while proclaiming his innocence. Determined not to give up, he sought help from the same justice system that put him behind bars. 15 years later, Davis was exonerated and the real killer found thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the determination of a group called the Innocence Project, who were determined to find the truth. Jane was a familiar face around El Dorado Hills, California. She was a columnist for Foothill Times. She often covered social events in and around town for the paper. Jane had 6 children whom she loved and often wrote poetry to help inspire them daily. She'd been working toward getting her real estate license and was married to Archie Hilton in 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage started to fall apart. It was then she asked her employer, Wilma Klein, for assistance. Klein owned a fairly large home in El Dorado Hills. With her lived her daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend. Wilma's grandson, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, also occupied a room at the house. On July 6, 1985, Wilma welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, 13-year-old Autumn Anker, into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house. The first night of her new life would prove to be the night her life ended. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, then 20, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering about outside. She told them she was out late and afraid her mother was going to be angry. All 3 made their way into the house. There was blood in the hallway. It was silent as they reached the first room, belonging to Maureen, Ricky's mother. On the bed was the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She was not breathing. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone on a camping trip and were not home at the time. Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered 29 stab wounds, was beaten and bitten on her shoulder. It was a senseless murder, and investigators began to interview those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi and DNA. Archie had been the logical choice as he and Jane had been going through a rough patch. He, however, said that the marriage was not over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared and all leaves went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl both told investigators they arrived home in the early morning hours and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet bloody. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom where they found Jane lying dead on the bloodied mattress. They speculated that an intruder may have been responsible for the murder. For 14 years, the case remained unsolved. The cold case reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were tasked with the investigation. After poring over paperwork, they zoomed in on a news article. Connie Dahl, former girlfriend of Ricky Davis and housemate Jane Hilton, had given an interview to a reporter. She was quoted saying Hilton's body was lying in bed like someone placed her there in the position she would normally sleep in. This statement seemed to contradict a muffled audio recording of a statement that Davis had previously made. Detective Fitzgerald falsely thought he heard him say the body was found on the floor. Dahl was, at the time, serving a jail sentence in Oregon on unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for an interview and began a 3-hour-long interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original story. Over the next 18 months, though, she would be interrogated 4 times. Detectives were found to have used techniques known to increase the chances of a false confession. Dahl was systematically forced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter Autumn in the murder. Dahl was threatened with the charge of murder. If she cooperated, though, she would be given a lenient sentence of manslaughter and serve only a year. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence was going to be used to trace the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence was brought into the case during that period. In truth, testing had not been done on the DNA recovered from the scene. By showing a crime scene photos and using facts from the crime, such as the bike mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators sped Dahl the information they wanted to hear. Over the course of the 4 interviews, Dahl was starting to break. She began remembering facts from the crime. This in turn allowed her to fabricate and create an entirely different account of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl said that Autumn was present during the murder of Jane and was sprayed with blood. In another, she confessed that she was probably the person that bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl would say that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She alleged that Davis wanted Autumn to join them at a party. When Jane refused, Davis erupted in a fit of anger, leading to the death of Jane. Her story kept changing to fit the facts being fed. However, she couldn't remember the weapon used for the murder or where it was eventually hidden. Dahl had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in the murder of Jane Hilton. He was now the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were also interviewed following the confession of Connie Dahl. Both Davis and Anker stuck to their original accounts of the crime. Detectives again lied to Davis, telling him that Anker had also implicated him in the murder. Anker told detectives she had no reason to protect Davis when they threatened her with culpability regarding the murder. Despite their interrogation techniques, detectives could not sway Davis or Anker to change their stories. They therefore used the confession of Dahl to arrest Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial was declared a mistrial by jurors. His second, in 2005, would eventually convict him. Dahl took the stand and testified against Davis. She told the court of how she struggled with Jane and she herself accidentally bit the victim on the shoulder. She went on to say that she went outside as Davis continued the bloody assault on Hilton. Dahl said she could hear screaming, pleading, and gurgling as Davis continued the brutal attack. Based entirely on the testimony of Dahl's account of events, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Jane Hilton. Dahl received a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a year-long sentence at the county jail. Dahl, though, would eventually die from a drug overdose in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis was not going down without a fight. He maintained his innocence and in 2006 made contact with the Northern California Innocence Project. He asked if they could help him prove that he was wrongly convicted. The NCIP was founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphe and Linda Starr. The project began after legislation offered convicted inmates to seek DNA testing to prove their innocence. It's a non-profit clinical program of Santa Clara University's School of Law. After Davis made contact with the NCIP in 2006, his case was put through a thorough re-examination. Cooperation between the NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office allowed for the DNA recovered from the crime scene to be retested post-conviction. Evidence from the crime scene included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The results revealed an unknown male DNA profile. DNA from Hilton's fingernails and nightgown were both found to be from the same source. Test results eliminated Davis, Dahl, and Anker. This proved Dahl's testimony was contradictory to the physical evidence and therefore had to have been fabricated. The DNA also proved Archie Hilton innocent. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time results were released. The DNA profile file was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA system, CODIS, but no matches were found. Although the evidence seemed to prove Davis's consistent claim of innocence correct, there were some hurdles that still needed to be jumped. The NCIP successfully argued that had the DNA results been presented to the jury during Davis's trial, the outcome would be different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required that new evidence point unerringly to innocence. It was considered an almost unattainable standard. In 2015, a false confession expert, Richard Leo, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations. Leo concluded that the methods used by detectives during the interrogation of Dahl were designed to pressure and persuade Dahl to adopt an account that matched the detectives' pre-existing beliefs about how and why the murder of Jane Hilton occurred. In 2016, though, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. This bill allowed wrongfully convicted inmates, like Davis, to prove that new evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence testing. Championed by former California State Senator Martha Lino, the bill was passed in January 2017, putting California's standard in line with about 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malikian vacated Davis's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. Initially set to start in fall of 2019, however, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020, citing the defense attorney's health as the catalyst for change in date. However, the fate of the trial was about to change once again. Advancements in DNA testing led to Davis becoming the first convicted person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated for a crime. Genetic genealogy is a fairly new DNA testing concept. It involves taking DNA evidence from a crime scene and sending them to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the man linked to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, many people spoke to the media about the man they knew as Michael Green. Green was a longtime resident of Roseville, California. He graduated from Oakmount High School in 1986. He was described as an easygoing, kind person, even-tempered, and even super chill. One classmate who wanted to remain anonymous could not understand why Green would go to El Dorado Hills and brutally murder a woman. According to reports, Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter, Autumn, met Green and two of his friends, Calvin and Stephen. They hung out together at the park when Autumn decided to go home and have a shower before returning. Allegedly, Autumn told her mother she was going to another friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. What happened next is pure speculation. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the house and was confronted by Jane. In a struggle to get away, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Following the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Davis, Dahl, and Otto when they returned home. Green had no criminal convictions either before or after the murder. It seems he'd led a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. The other two boys who were with Green were tracked down shortly after his arrest. Calvin, unfortunately, had died some time ago. Stephen, however, was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. He was being treated as a witness and not a participant. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020. Since Green was a teenager at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance at the juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Vern Pearson said that, procedurally, the court has to go through some steps on the juvenile side of it. Following this, Green was granted a transfer so that he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before he would be tried in court. Green pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. This plea means Green gave up his right to a jury trial. A jury trial meant he was to face a charge of first-degree murder. He also gave up his chance to challenge the plea or the consequences of his decision. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, to be presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor in psychological science education, was called in on educational capacity to explain to the court the development of an adolescent. Kaufman's research explained the varying development needs of adolescents with regard to emotional and cognitive development. The late adolescent stage allowed an individual to understand right from wrong, yet at the same time, they're also functioning under diminished capacity for impulse control. The defense called several witnesses from Green's childhood, some who even maintained relationships with him into adulthood. Each witness was asked if their opinion had changed of him since the knowledge of his confession. All witnesses agreed they'd been shocked to discover that he was responsible for the murder of Hilton. Individuals who knew him in varying capacities described him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving. These words were used to describe him before and after the murder. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, "There's just not a bad bone in Mike." After witness statements were given, each of Jane Hilton's children presented their victim impact statements. They all described the unforgivable loss that Green inflicted upon their family. The why it happened and how different my life could have been will haunt me forever, said Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters. Argith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother, and I assume Michael loves his mother too. I want to know what he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you received an early morning call to tell you your mother is dead?" The court listened to her description of the feeling of gathering her mother's belongings from the house in which she was killed. Ardith finished with a powerful declaration. "We will always have something in common, regretting the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son Ian echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the uncertainty the family faced and the recurring nightmares they suffered, especially after the crooked finger of blame was pointed at his own sister, Autumn. He broke down in tears as he ended with an almost inaudible remark. "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her statement showed true agony as she recounted the cloud of suspicion she'd lived under for the last 2 decades. Recounting the day 2 crew-cut thick mustache detectives came into her house telling her they found the people responsible for her mother's death, she was then repeatedly accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn went on to say that if she hadn't said the word lawyer at that point, she did not know how much further the intimidation tactics of the investigators could have gone. Afterwards, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he asked Green what made him end Jane's life in such a brutal manner. "You beat her. She had numerous wounds around her head and face. By your own words, you kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder. Why was that?" Linden continued to read the statement that expressed how Green didn't just murder Jane, he destroyed numerous lives in the process. Linden then asked Green if he'd given any thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her achievements and the love she had for each of her children. In closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, stressed the idea that he was unable to stop himself. She emphasized that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, as he was an adolescent at the time. This argument was based on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She asked that the court show mercy as she read off the multiple penal codes and rules of the court. Judge Kingsbury interjected by saying, "The court is not going to put him on probation," effectively ending any further comment from the defense. In response, Lyndon thanked the court and said the application for probation was offensive. He said, "It was a smack to this family who had endured this for decades." Lyndon stated that he already got away with murder for 37 years. Placing him on probation allowed him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a multitude of arguments about murder cases surrounding adolescent development. She remarked that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was by far the most brutal. Before passing her sentence, Kingsbury asked the family for their forgiveness for the trauma they had suffered, although she was not originally assigned the case. She also hoped they would heal from the pain, as it would have been their mother's wish. Kingsbury then encouraged Green to use all resources at his disposal in the California Department of Rehabilitation. "You're the key to the questions these people have. Doing that could ultimately help you with your outcome as it relates to parole," said Kingsbury. In closing, Kingsbury pointed out that she had heard from his friends that there's a great side to him and that he has much to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remanded to the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be decided after further consideration by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate over pizza with his family. His lawyer, Melissa O'Connell, said he will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. Although the amount was high enough for him to re-enter society and start afresh, O'Connell said it could not make up for the years of freedom that he lost. Davis went on to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020 for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit names El Dorado County as well as former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who's deceased and being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony has also been included in the complaint. A Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was homeless after being released. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644. This bill would, commencing January 1, 2024, prohibit law enforcement officers from employing threats, physical harm, deception, or psychological manipulative interrogation tactics, as specified during a custodial interrogation of a person 17 years of age or younger. The bill faced opposition, but District Attorney Van Pearson is urging all law enforcement to stop using intimidation tactics. Pearson stated that 10 years ago, he would have viewed the methods used to get a confession differently. However, after seeing the true impact it can have, he believed there is room for change. This also comes after research points to deceptive tactics being used for years by law enforcement that will presume guilt and focus on getting a confession rather than getting the full story. The district attorney is implementing this new policy in his office and is urging other district attorneys to do the same. El Dorado County DA's office will now reject any case where the primary evidence is a confession obtained using threats, lies, or psychological manipulation interrogation tactics. These measures are to ensure that no one is ever again convicted based on a coerced false confession like the case of Ricky Davis. Pearson personally apologized to all involved in the miscarriage of justice caused by the tactics used by Ben investigators into the brutal 1985 murder of Jane Hilton. After 37 years, the right man is finally facing justice. Yet the lives of so many were left broken by mistakes and false accusations. For Jane Hilton's family, hopefully they can now pick up the pieces after being divided over the innocence of their own sister, Autumn. Ricky Davis can never regain the liberty he lost. And Michael Green destroyed not only the lives of the victim's family and friends, but the lives that he touched in the years before and after the murder. What are your thoughts on today's case? Did Michael Green deserve the sentence he received? Does this clean record, minus the murder, make him innocent of intentional murder? How could he let an innocent man take the blame for his actions? Can Ricky Davis ever get his life back on track even when he does receive compensation? And why is it taking so long? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, take care.